All right, everybody, we are back with the How I Sell podcast. A reminder to our listeners, for season 2, we are asking our guests the same 5 questions each time. Today, I am very excited to bring to you Mike Goldenberg, the current head of sales at Goldcast. And in a previous life, Mike was the head of sales at Analyst, the VP of sales at Mineral Tree, and the head of sales amongst other titles at Log Me In. Mike, very, very impressive career. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Although you did give me a little too much credit at Log Me In. I was not the head of sales there. I developed my career there and kind of worked my way up into a director role before moving into, the earlier phase startup world in kind of head of sales, VP of sales types of roles. But thank you for the credit.
Cool. Yes, of course, of course. I also left out one key thing. We're both Michigan grads, so go
Go
blue.
blue. Yeah,
That's what I'm
buddy.
talking about. Awesome. Well, before we jump into our 5 questions, one quick question for you. Who is Mike Goldenberg?
Boy, that's a deep question. Mike Goldenberg is a father, someone who loves the beach, someone who I think tries to take a very human approach to, let's call it, life and sales, and treat people the way, the golden rule for Goldenberg is often, I'd say a good way to summarize the way I try and approach things. But yeah, I'm someone who, loves sales. I've been doing it pretty much my whole life. And, back in the day, I was actually selling, for my father and cold calling packaging for him. But it's something where, I just try and treat people and treat situations the way I would want to. I think that, if there's one thing that's, let's call it, unique about my approach is it's I try and come across, let's call it, more casual than your average head of sales, and try and meet people at their level, and not come across as such an a-hole or other words you might use to describe most heads of sales.
Yeah, yeah, that's something we hear often, is trying to break out of that stereotype of what a salesperson used to be. And getting to know you a little bit over our previous calls and chatting with you, I can say that I have certainly seen the casual nature. So I appreciate it too. And I do love when folks answer that question with the human side, describing yourself as a father first and living by the golden rule for Goldenberg. Those are things that I really appreciate. So if you're ready, we can jump into the 5 questions. The first of which is, what is the best investment an early career salesperson can do for themselves, and why?
Yeah, to me, the best investment, and this is the obvious cliche, is invest in yourself. And, one of the things that, you go to school, right? We spend all this money on college, and now there's some programs to actually major in sales, which there wasn't, when I was younger. But there's so much information on the internet, if you just Google, right, that you can spend that time. If you're going to be a pro, if you're going to, really, this is going to be your career, invest in yourself. You don't need to spend a ton of money. You don't need to wait for your company to give you all the training. Just going through LinkedIn and using some of the resources there, that you see people posting. Um, Looking for videos, trying to figure out how to do things. Don't wait for people to come to you. Perfect example, right? As a young salesperson, they're going to give you a bunch of tools, and they're going to give you the basic way to use them, but it's going to be on you as an individual to then invest in yourself further, to like look up how to do different things in that tool, or look for videos of how others are using and things like that. So I think a lot of it is, don't wait. It's, invest in yourself, and use a lot of the resources that are out there and available to you.
Yeah, it's smart, and something that is often forgot. I think mostly because generally, folks as like a general rule, people are just lazy. But that you often get asked, or questions you often get asked as a VP of sales, can often just be answered by a simple Google search. There's got to be how-to videos on nearly everything today. So I would agree. I think the the salespeople or the folks at startups specifically that do well are just folks that kind of just do it on their own. And if they get stuck after looking it up on their own, that's when they come and ask for help. So I think that's good advice. Moving on to question number 2. What's the biggest surprise you experienced early in your career?
I'd say the biggest surprise that I experienced early in my career was how capable I was, even being, being younger and less experienced. Because, right, I mean, you come in and there's all these, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of experience and wisdom that comes from a lot of the, older reps and more experienced reps. But sales isn't rocket science. It really isn't. I mean, it's about learning some simple fundamentals and leveraging kind of your own, hopefully, personality traits and things like that. Um, but it was one of those things where, I think initially I came in and almost, put people up on a pedestal of like, I couldn't possibly be ready to have those conversations, especially with, like, as an example, a larger account, right? Or for a larger deal amount or something like that. It can be intimidating. So I think I was just surprised at, how not overly complicated it really is, and that as a young salesperson, like, don't put limits on yourself or kind
Yep.
of hold yourself back. Like, at the end of the day, the beauty of being a salesperson is it's based on your production and your ability to, drive results, and experience can be really helpful in that. But that what we were talking about, being resourceful and finding answers and things for yourself, I think you can climb up and be capable of doing a lot in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, that's really great. I actually heard a similar thing. I interviewed Kevin Dorsey of Patient Pop the other week, and
Oh
he
yeah.
he mentioned the same thing. And I mentioned to him, and I also feel the same. I mentioned it to you too. It's like once you get in, you're taught your whole career that you have to, like college degree, you have to work hard, get to the next test, get the A, do really well in your classes, and then when you get out in the
Hmm.
open in the real world, you've got nothing, right? Like no one's gonna guide you. There's no syllabus to push you forward, so you kind of figure that out on your own. And some folks I do see you can kind of you can see it earlier in their career where it's like the switch flips for them, and they're able to understand that it's up to them to make their own career and up to them to carve their own path in the real world, even if no one's going to guide you. I'm curious to know for you, like, when was that? Was it a year in? Was it 5 years in? Sooner than that, later than that?
A year or 5 years until I felt what?
Until when you realized, I'm able to kind of take my career into my own hands and I'm able to achieve above other folks.
I think that came probably at a time, probably like early on in my time at LogMeIn, where, just having the ability to outperform certain people who, again, might have more experience and knew the product and all those things better. But, by having better results and kind of a different approach to things, it opened up opportunities, and it very much, made me realize that, and this is again, the great part of sales is, it's not about your age, your experience, or any of those things. It's about, can you produce? It's like being an athlete, right? It doesn't matter how many games you won or how many points you scored in the past. It's, can you deliver results now? That's, what people really care about.
Yep, that's right. It's very comparable to athletics, and even talking about the great players in any sport today. They still have to show up and put up the next year they're there, or they're just cut. Not as aggressive, I think, in sales, but you still have to perform, or you're out, unfortunately. Question number 3. What's one mistake that you made early in your career that shaped the way you operate today?
God, there's so many of them. Where to begin? I could go down a list. I'll say one of the big, mistakes early on that, really shaped, the way I look at things is, I kind of had that attitude, which probably a lot of reps have, which is, it's like you don't love to forecast, right? listen, I don't know what's going to happen. These people could go either way. Like, yeah, they seem like they like it. Yeah, I've asked all the questions, but sometimes feeling like it's, impossible to forecast, right? And it's, I'm doing my best, like, and I'm hitting my numbers. So like, why do you need to like be up my ass about the forecast kind of thing? It was kind of like a funny moment where, a mentor of mine was like, you know what, why don't I just tell like the rest of the company that, because I said something like, he was like, what's your forecast? And I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He goes, why don't I write that down for the rest of the company? We need to, we need to make a million important decisions based off of how well we're doing from a revenue perspective, what's working, what's not, all these things. But I'll let everyone know that you said don't worry about it. You know what I mean? And just kind of putting into context of like it's about more than you. Like a lot of the things you are doing as a salesperson, it's easy to be selfish, right? We have our commission, we have our, whatever else that's very like individual, but not, I think that was kind of an eye-opening thing a little bit of what you're doing has a much bigger impact on the company than just the numbers you're bringing in, but
Right.
the different parts of the sales rep role that, are valuable and important to the company.
Right, that makes sense. So after you learned that forecasting is important and your commitment does impact others in the company, how did you use that? How did it shape you going forward? And what have you put in place in your own personal pipeline or for your teams to make sure that folks adhere to that rule of commitment and doing it out in the open?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, it's an ongoing kind of thing for everyone because, like I said, I mean, it is true, right? It's always hard. Forecasting is super difficult, especially when you are, things are moving quickly. It's not always as clear as people would like it to be, where it's like, they said they need to have it all done by this date and then work backwards and right, you can kind of figure it all out and they're committing to you 6 weeks before they actually sign the contract. It's not always that clean and clear cut. So I think, as much as anything, what I've tried to do is help people understand why it's important, help them understand, like, even though it's not a perfect science, how to kind of triangulate the different points of information they have to give their best bet. And, my reps, will all tell you that the question I'm always asking them is, if you had to bet $500 on it right now, when's it coming in or is it coming in? You know what I mean? If you had to bet me the actual money, right? And it puts into like more real terms of, especially with close dates, right? Because
Right.
reps always, it's like, I want to get it in by the end of the month. I got the close date as the end of the month. It's like, all right, but you said we still haven't gotten this and this. There's only 4 days left. Do you want it to come in that day, or would you bet
Yep.
me $500 right now it's going to come in? If we were going to bet $500, when would you really say it's going to come in? It's probably not going to come in until the second week of the next month. You're like, okay, great, put that as the close date.
Yep. Yep.
So I think it's giving people perspective. I think that's true of a lot of the stuff, though. We ask salespeople to do, whether it's what you're putting into Salesforce or forecasting in general. Um, I think people, if they understand it better, both in terms of how to do it and like the true value of it versus just like, I'm your boss, I want your forecast, then I think it allows people to understand and to do it and to understand that it's an important part of their job beyond just the actual closing of the deals.
Yep, I would agree. I have something similar that I like to say is eliminating that hope from your qualified pipeline, making sure that everything is lined up. And the question I ask is similar to you, and maybe a little aggressive, but it's something like, if you were to bet your paycheck on this, would you say that this is accurate to the best of your ability? So similar mindset, similar mentality of just removing that I think or the if,
Yeah.
and just making it really clear and lined up well. And it's not, if it doesn't close, right, it's okay. You just need to know the reason why. And if it does close, at least you did a good enough job to forecast for your team and for the company.
Yep. Exactly.
So, question number four, I wanted to move on this one. Who has had the
Yep.
biggest impact on your career and why and how?
Boy, that's like a two-sided kind of answer, because the obvious thing is to say, a boss, a mentor, right? And
Yep.
I've had a
Yep.
lot of really good bosses and mentors, including, people like Armin Zildjian, over at Drift, people like Josh Allen, who's over at Owl Labs, Larry D'Angelo, who's over at Notarize, and I'm sure a slew of other people, that have been super helpful and given me a lot of great advice, over the years, and people I've learned from. But I also think there's the other side of it, which is like the reps, that
Yep.
I've learned from. And, my greatest point of pride is the reps who have like gone on themselves to move into management, director roles, and things like that. So honestly, I've learned as much, and from the people that have worked for me as the people that I've worked for. So, and honestly, on a daily basis often now, like I'm still learning from the people who are like in the trenches, who are just trying new things. Because I think the biggest thing, to be honest with you, with sales is, especially, more recently, is like it's just changing and evolving so quickly in terms of like
Yep.
what actually works, and the different solutions and different approaches and things like that. So I'm very much, still constantly learning, but I'd say those are, some of the people that I've learned from the most.
Yep, that's awesome. And I do think it's a two-way street. I think you learn a ton from the folks, that come before you and train you, and then the folks on your team. It's always great. And beyond just tech tools and whatnot, new ways of selling, I think, is critically important. If somebody learns something and they execute really well on it over time, kind of the new generation of outbound, I think it's really important to learn from those and integrate it right back into your sales process. So I love that answer. And I would agree, watching folks that you've mentored and folks that you coached and hired become managers is one of the most gratifying things you can have out of your career, which is awesome. So, last question we ask everybody here, Mike, is the following. If you could go back in time now that you have the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give yourself when you were entering your career? So, think back to those right coming out of Michigan days.
I think the advice, well, it's like you can't question what came before, as long as it led you a good place. Um, I think for me personally, like, the first 4 years out of school, I just, I was in a couple different industries before software and technology. Um, and, I think I probably learned a lot from those industries and things like that and those experiences. But the sooner I could have gotten insight into, like the right industry and things like, if I could have, I didn't do internships and stuff. Like, I see these kids who are like in college who are just so far ahead of where I was.
Yeah.
I probably just would have given myself a heads up of like, don't waste your time those first 4 years on those other things. Like, just go straight into software tech.
Yep. It's that's good. That's good. It's tough. It's really tough when you're in it to even know what you want to do. Though for me, I lucked into software tech or the tech industry in general. I screwed around trying to be an investment banker and a lawyer prior to tech for a little bit, and then finally found something that I loved and went after it.
Oh, and
Um,
my other piece of advice there would be hold your options longer.
very
even if you're
sound.
even if you might not, like when you're younger, right, that cash is worth more, at that point. But yeah, hold on to those options.
Very, very sound advice and important, especially if you're on a rocket ship, to make sure that you negotiate the hell out of those options and get a meaningful chunk along the way and then hold them until they are worth something.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I want to give you the opportunity to tell folks about you a little bit. Where can they find you? Tell me a little bit about Goldcast and anything else you want to tell them about how to reach out to you.
Yeah, the easiest way to reach out to me is, just probably through LinkedIn, or you can, of course, get me at michael@goldcast.io. We are actively hiring for account executives and BDRs. And hopefully, if you've listened to this podcast, you get a pretty decent sense of kind of what you'd be dealing with, in terms of, my style and approach to things. But I think that, generally speaking, the way I look at it nowadays is, um, life's too short to work with people and for people that like A, don't appreciate you, and B, don't give you the opportunity to grow. And, I think that's something that we do really try and do, and I try and do is, let people, grow, let them, I like to develop from within and really give people the opportunity to move up, to try different things. I'd like to listen to people and their ideas in a way that I don't know if other, companies tend to do as much. So yeah, I mean, if that sounds of interest and you want to, have a conversation, I'm very open to it, and get at me.
Awesome. Well, Mike, it has been a real pleasure hosting you on the How I Sell podcast. And for folks out there, remember it's the golden rule for Goldenberg, and we will hopefully, Mike, see you again sometime soon. Real pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Danny.